Good evening, bonsoir, Annie. Welcome to another virtual Science North Star Party. I'm Olathe. I'm the staff scientist for Space Place and the Planetarium. I'm your host this evening. I'm also joined by Lucy. Lucy is the science communicator for the Planetarium, and she will be giving us a tour of tonight's night sky very shortly. Our special guest this evening is an Ojibway knowledge carrier and local educator, Will Morin. Will be sharing with us some connections between dream catchers and the night sky and constellations. Definitely looking forward to that. We are all joining you from Sudbury, Ontario, in Swakamuck. We are on the traditional and ancestral lands of the Atikameksheng, Anishinaabe, and Wanapitei First Nation, and we are in the Robertson Huron Treaty area. If you are joining us live, please take a moment to share where you are joining us from. And throughout the night sky tour and Will's presentation, please do leave your questions and comments for us. We love engaging with you. All right, so we do have something special going on in the night sky tonight. Lucy, tell us more about it and everything we can see up there.
Hello, thank you, Olathe. So we're taking a look at the night sky for tonight after the sun sets. So as we've mentioned here before, if you go outside right at sunset, you won't really be able to see anything. It's still too bright. So I like to suggest people to wait at least an hour to an hour and a half after the sun sets for it to be a bit darker. And that way we'll be able to see way more stars. So the sun sets at around 8:35 this time of year. So if we go outside at 9:35 or even closer to 10 o'clock, you'll be able to see a really nice night sky. So right now I have it on Stellarium, which is a free downloadable program that you can use, a little planetarium that you can use to find a lot of things in the night sky. I'm using a web-based version, so it's a free version you can use just on your browser. It's stellarium-web.org. So if you'd like to take a look at that, you can always take a look in the description and it'll be there. So we're going to start off with some nice bright stars. It's so much easier to start with the brighter stars, and we're going to star hop from there. As we did before, let's start off with the Big Dipper. It's one that a lot of people can recognize. So we're looking towards the north, and a bit towards the northwest over here. We have what looks like, well, a ladle or a spoon. You got the pot area here and the handle. So we have the Big Dipper. This is an asterism. It's a simple formation of stars that's usually part of one or even more constellations. So this is part of Ursa Major, the Big Bear. We've got a few stars over here for a nice head, some stars down here for the front paws and back paws. So if we use a bit of imagination, we can find the Big Bear or Ursa Major in the night sky. It's a bear that was drawn with a really big tail. And from here, we can star hop. We can jump from star to star to help us find more constellations. So we'll take the lines and the art away so we can see what it would look like in the night sky. And taking the two stars right at the edge of the pot of the Big Dipper, we call these pointer stars because, well, they point to a star. And we can follow the imaginary line it makes outwards from the pot to find this star right here. It's fairly bright, but certainly not the brightest. It is known as Polaris, which is the North Star. So as the Earth spins on itself, it spins on its axis. So the star right above the North Pole, it's a star that doesn't move. And we happen to have a star above the North Pole, Polaris. So as we progress through the night, so the other stars will seem to be kind of spinning around the North Star. No matter what time of year it is, no matter what time of night, if we can find Polaris, we're facing north. And it happens to be part of its own grouping of stars. It's an asterism, but also a constellation. We have these stars here for the handle and the pot area for the Little Dipper. Or we also have Ursa Minor, the little bear, another bear with a really big tail. But from here, we can do some star hopping. There are some stars in between the two bears that curve around, curve back, and makes the head of Draco the dragon. And his head is really close to a really bright star known as, this one's Deneb, but this really bright one, Vega. So let's spin this around so we can take a look, looking towards the south now. So we pretty much just spun all the way around. Taking the art and lines away, we can see three fairly bright stars. So we have Vega, Deneb, and Altair making a nice big triangle in the night sky. Here it looks fairly big, but I do want to mention that it'll look much bigger outside. The sky is really big. So we have a nice big triangle. We can see it throughout the whole summer season. So lo and behold, we have what's known as the summer triangle. Very easy to remember. It is an asterism that's in this case part of three constellations. So let's start off with Vega. Vega is part of one that kind of looks like a tie or a fish, depending how you look at it, but it's known as lyra, which is a music instrument. Then from here, we can find Deneb, which is part of Cygnus the Swan. It has some nice stars here to make a nice long neck and two big, beautiful wings. The tail back here. And this one, Altair, is part of Aquila. So we've got two wings and a tail down here. So we have an eagle. So we've got some really fun constellations to take a look at. But if we look carefully underneath the summer triangle, tonight we can find Saturn and Jupiter up in the night sky. So planets, they orbit around the sun just like the Earth. They're not always at the same spot. It's not always easy to know where they're at, but they're always along an imaginary line through space that goes through the zodiac sign. So we call this imaginary line, I'll kind of make it pop up. It's known as the ecliptic line. So it's an imaginary line where the sun travels through. So as the Earth goes around the sun will be going in front of constellations. And we made these constellations the zodiac signs. So we have the zodiac signs along the ecliptic, but the sun is not the only thing that goes along the ecliptic. Near it, we have the planets and even the moon. So we have some wonderful things to take a look at tonight. If you have a pair of binoculars or even a telescope, you'll get to see some really neat things that you wouldn't be able to see with just your eyes. Our eyes are pretty good, but not that great. Telescopes and binoculars allow us to see even further out. So with a pair of binoculars, if you make sure that you're taking a look through them in a way that's pretty steady, so you can lean your elbows on a table or on your knees to try to keep it steady, you'll be able to zoom in to Jupiter and see something really neat. So Jupiter has a lot of moons, but it has four bigger moons known as the Galilean moons because they were found out by Galileo. So we've got the four Galilean moons in a nice line. We've got Io, Callisto, Ganymede, and Europa. Now, if you do have a telescope or get the chance to look through a telescope, depending how clear the night is and how good the telescope is, you might be able to see the bands on Jupiter, which is absolutely gorgeous to see. Another one that's really neat to look at would be Saturn. And Saturn is very well known for its rings. So if we look close enough, we'll get to see Saturn's rings. Here it also shows us which ones are its moons. But we do have Saturn's rings right here. Really, really nice to see. Now, as I mentioned, they go through the zodiac signs. So they happen to be Jupiter will be in Aquarius, while Saturn is in Capricorn. They're not too bad to find. They have some bright-ish stars, but there are other ones that are easier to find and look at. So looking towards the south, we have these two here, Scorpius and Sagittarius. These are a lot of fun to look at. So Scorpius has a really bright star in the center of it. It's a nice reddish star, a red supergiant star known as Antares. I always like showing this one because, well, a lot of people would mistake this star for the planet Mars. Mars is a reddish planet. It looks like a red dot in the night sky, and as we've mentioned, the planets go along the zodiac signs. So a lot of people would mistake this for Mars. So to help us out, they called it Antares. Mars was the Roman god of war. Ares is the Greek god of war. So calling it Antares literally means not Mars. And if we use these stars over here for its claws, and its nice stinger right down over here. Now, Olathe, did we get any questions during that time? Your mic is off.
There we go. I was typing a little bit.
Yeah.
So Stephen is asking how late Jupiter will be out. Like when is Jupiter setting? It's just wondering.
We could probably see it
Do a
the
little fast
whole
forward
night.
time here, yeah.
Yeah, so at the bottom here, we could actually take a look at the night sky using this program and take a look at it at any time, any date you'd like. You can take a look at what the sky looked like when you were born, or thousands years ago, or even 1,000 years in the future. You can have a lot of fun with this. But if we fast forward, let's see how well this is going to fast forward.
And we also have Angèle joining us from French River. Hi.
Nice.
Glad you're here.
All right, so we are fast forwarding all the way up to, okay, I'm barely like zoomed in. Let's zoom out a bit so I have a better look at the horizon. So Saturn and Jupiter are still up at 4 a.m. and the Saturn sets, and then Jupiter's still up as the sun is rising. So we can't see Jupiter the whole night tonight, which is really fun. So if you're the type that has to go to bed early and wake up super early, like before the sunrise, you'll get to see Jupiter setting in the southeast, or still just above the horizon southeast. You'll get to see Saturn set. So yes, you can see that one the whole night. Well, let's bring it back to the evening, because I don't know about you guys, but I'm usually asleep early in the morning. I do like my beauty sleep. So we'll take a look at the night sky. I brought it just before 10 o'clock at night, so a bit earlier than what we were looking at. But next to Scorpius, we do have Sagittarius. Now, this one's part, well, it has a asterism in this constellation. This one is a fun one. So we have these stars right here, and we do need to use a bit of imagination. We've got a base, a spout, a lid, and a handle back over here. So we have what really looks like a teapot. So we do call this the teapot. With a few extra stars and a lot more imagination, we get to see Sagittarius. Half man, half horse. He's a centaur with a bow and arrow. He's aiming his arrow towards Scorpius, but not only that, right over here, I don't know if you can tell, there's kind of like this haziness of light. So if it's dark enough out, if you're far enough away from any towns and cities where there's a lot of light pollution, in other words, if you're in the middle of nowhere, you'll get to see this kind of like haziness of light, this kind of like what looks like a cloud of light, a band of light going above us. And it actually goes through in between the in the summer triangle. So the summer triangle is right here. We got Deneb, Vega, and Altair. So it kind of goes in between here. This here happens to be the Milky Way. And the Milky Way is our galaxy. A galaxy is a nice big grouping of stars. And our galaxy is actually kind of like a spiral galaxy. It has arms spiraling from the center. I like to think of it kind of like a plate. It has arms spiraling out. But if you look at it from the side, it's not very thick. A plate's not very thick compared to how big it is. So we're actually seeing our galaxy from this by being inside of the galaxy. So we're only seeing kind of it from the side. So we're seeing this band of light that comes from stars really far away that, well, with just our eyes, we can't see because our eyes can't see that far out. So instead of seeing individual stars from the stars in our galaxy that are far away, we're seeing some of the light coming from them. But the teapot or Sagittarius, the tip of the arrow, points towards the center of our galaxy. So the center of our galaxy is in this direction here.
And Lucy, Linda Pelaya from the Rask Sudbury Center has also let us know that northeast of the teapot, there's a sugar spoon. So I know that the Rask Sudbury Center is not holding public star parties yet, but when those start up again, Linda is usually there. So check out their website and find Linda some evening and get her to point out that sugar spoon for you.
Exactly, for sure. All right, so I figure that we can probably switch over, and if we have time, we can come back to the night sky. But this is a good little introduction to the night sky for tonight. If we have more time afterwards, I don't want to take too much time for showing. I could spend the whole time just showing you stars.
Oh, we definitely want to leave time to hear from Will. I do have very quickly, you gave a lovely presentation, and for our viewers right now, I do have a little quiz just to see if folks were paying attention. We'd like to do this to sort of to make it interactive, wake you guys up. So if you have another device that you can join on, that works out really well. Oh, wait, I need to back up. It's on question two of two. Okay, here we go. Oh no, it's saying voting is closed. Okay, let's see what happens. If it'll let me
start it up again.
Start it up again? I don't know. Okay, hold on, guys. Let's see. Let's go with present. You know what? I might just not be able to ask the first question. So we'll go big. We won't do voting for this, but while we're getting set up, go to mentimeter.com and use this code. And we're going to do a couple of these quizzes throughout. So please do join in. It lets us know that you're out there and participating. So the code is 1715419. And the first question that Lucy covered really well, which was, which of these stars can we see tonight? I don't know where the little voting is closed thing comes from. So we might not be able to, this one's just kind of a test one. Answer in your head right now. And I'll actually just give you the answer, and then you'll be all set to do our next question. So we had Vega, Altair, and Deneb pointed out to us. We can see all of those in the night sky. And this is just for fun. In the comments, what asterism are those three stars part of? Do you remember what Lucy said there? You can go ahead and just leave it in the comments this time. So Vega, Altair, and Deneb. So we'll give a few moments because we know there's a little bit of a delay on like when we see your comments versus when we ask you questions. And Lucy, maybe you can just go over again which star is in which constellation to help people. So like Vega's in Lyra and...
Yeah. So Vega is in Lyra. We have Deneb, which is part of Cygnus the Swan, and Altair is part of Aquila the Eagle.
Mm-hmm. And so those three bright stars are also part of an asterism, not a constellation, but some sort of recognizable feature of a grouping of stars in the night sky. Yes, voting is closed. So we're just like on the fly, we're making it a leave it in the comments for this time. Because we know you can't vote on this.
Because technology sometimes have issues, but that's okay.
So this time we're looking for the asterism. On the next slide, I'm pretty sure voting is not closed.
We can probably move also to the next slide and let people answer that one too.
Okay, let's do it. So, okay. Question 1 of 2. So we're waiting for some players to join us. Yes, we have some players.
Go to slide.
Yay. Okay, so I'm going to press enter for the countdown. You have 20 seconds to answer the question. Oh, and Linda's got the answer. The summer triangle is also sometimes called the big piece of pizza in the sky. That's a good one to look for. There's also an ice cream cone in the sky. Maybe we can look for that after. Okay, awesome. We've got some participants, so I'm going to hit enter. And here we go. Which planet has the Galilean moons? Jupiter, Saturn, or Neptune? So we saw moons around. We zoomed in and saw some moons on 2 different planets this evening. that are visible in the night sky with your naked eye. And 3, 2, 1, time's up. Woo, very nice. Yes, Jupiter has the Galilean moons. So those are something that you can see pretty easily with pretty much any telescope you would be looking with. So definitely something to check off your viewing list. Okay, here we go. So which star's name means not Mars? Is it Antares, Vega, or Deneb? Which one is not Mars? And so this is kind of neat. Oh, there we go. You guys just got that one super fast. Awesome. Okay, good to know you're out there. Good to know you're paying attention. Thank you so much for playing. And now we are going to hear from Will. I've definitely been looking forward to this presentation for like months now. So welcome, Will. Take it away.
Welcome. Thank you, Miigwech. Thank you. And that was a wonderful start to our session that we're going to be doing today and later tonight as well. So I'm really excited. And for those that are of Ojibway ancestry, I honor and acknowledge where we are, the territory that we're on. And so my name is Will Morin Dishnakasaki Wednong, and knows what my Shami knows when. So my spirit name is North Facing Wolf, Mayingendorim. Wolf is my clan. And the community that I come from is Michipekwadanong, and that's a community you would know as Michipekawatan near Wawa, Ontario. And in my presentation, as I speak about some of these things, how important that introduction is when we make reference to the connections to both the stars and the other aspects about Indigenous culture. And one in particular is simply thank you to everyone at Science North for all the help that you're doing in bringing this together, but how important it is that connection that we find with each other, because the stars that we see here in North America, specifically above the woodlands, are not just stars, that we actually have our own stories that are related to them. And once we have those stories, some of those stories get translated into the artwork that we see on the rocks and in the many different other art forms that we see up until today, and how language is a tool to assist in translating what those stars and what those images in the rock art articulate. And so as we move on to the next slide, as we understand the origin in how that rolls. So next slide. So whoever's got the slide controls, all right, there we go. And so move to the next slide, in that how the constellations and the stars that are up there are not just simply stars in the sky, that in Ojibwe culture and in our language, with the next slide, it's a celebration of our engagement within the universe, not just simply a physical experience, but a cosmic experience. Next slide. And how we understand that those constellations are just simply, groupings of stars, that there are actually stories associated with those stars, from the Small Dipper to the Big Dipper, and the other ones identified when we understand in the presentation that Lucy just shared, that we see other cultures also looked up and put anthropomorphized. They made them into living beings, animals and people and such. So next slide. And how those stars tell us of connections and relationships. And it's not just simply that they're up there, but they also move and shift and demonstrate our connection to the changes in the seasons as well too. Next slide. And so we understand that as a starting point, but every culture in every hemisphere looks up to the stars and wonders and imagines, personifies the stars to help define their worldview, to navigate the waters, to explain their connections to the broader natural world from their place here on the earth. Next slide. And how important it is that we understand that the connection to those locations. So as I honor that connection that I have, as we see that the connection where my community comes from, and one of them in particular is this being that we see painted on the rocks in Agua near Wawa, Ontario, north of Sault Ste. Marie, is the Misha Bijou, and he's one of our Manitous, one of our Manados, as we would say, is the great panther. And we understand that they're not just simply rocks painted, that these rocks weren't painted to match the couch, that these images had stories that bring us back through time. Next slide. And we understand that when we acknowledge that through time, as I honor my mother as well as her parents from the community that we come from. And when we say their name, we would say Ba. And that word is also for a number of cultures in Ojibway and Algonquin and Cree and so forth, that when we add that, it's that they've moved on to the spirit world. That Ba is also a word that means sleep. And when we sleep, we dream. And when we dream, our spirit travels to the spirit world. And as I honor my mom and my grandparents, the community that I come from, that my ancestral roots are connected to on the eastern shores of Lake Superior, go back over 7,000 years. Archaeological evidence of the proof of that connection to a place where indigenous peoples, where my indigenous ancestors have been existing, where we see that connection to the stars and to this earth. Next slide. And we see how important that those patterns that we see in the stars were also patterns that we saw here on the earth. And later tonight, I'm going to be showing and sharing and speaking about, as we create a dream catcher, we're going to be standing in a circle, and I'll be weaving you, the people standing in the circle as the hoop, a pattern that is a dream catcher. And without giving out too much of what I'll be talking about later tonight, but the pattern that you see in the dream catcher, if you look at it very, very closely, that pattern is not just simply, a form and lines and such. It's a single strand that weaves a pattern that in Western culture they identified as phi, or the golden section, or the golden mean, the Fibonacci. That pattern phi is recognized as a source for architecture and design and so forth, as a tool to assist in creating these forms. But for us Anishinaabe people, they were patterns we saw in nature. And then if you looked at the bottom of a pine cone or the hat of an acorn, you would see the very same pattern as you would see in other plants. And it was our connection. And as I show you as we move on to the next slide, how that pattern is a connection to so many other things that links us. So here's a quote by Jim Dumont. Jim Dumont, one of my elders, one of my mentors from the Department of Indigenous Studies at the University of Sudbury. Long time ago, he shared this in class, and it just woke me up. And it's as if we truly want to, understand. So to choose to understand and sensibly appreciate Native myth and legend, we must be willing, first of all, to accept that there is involved here a very special way of seeing the world. After we see that world as special, then we have to do one more thing. So second layer, we have to, and a necessary further step, we must make an attempt to participate in that way of seeing. And it's true as he says this. Now let's move to the next slide. So we understand how important it is that there's a special way of seeing, and we need to participate in that way of seeing. And if I take out the word indigenous, and I invite you to put your own culture, your own gender, your own age group as a myth of small people, the myth of young people, the myth of women, the myth of men, the myth of other cultures, that the same quote applies universally. And how it's not a matter of one is better than the other. It means that there's going to be different ways of seeing the world, and that the indigenous ways of seeing the stars, the Anishinaabe way of seeing the stars, is our unique way of connecting with the stars. And we'll go further with that in a moment. But how important it is that we need to participate. We invite you to participate in our way of seeing before I begin to show you the rest of these slides. Next slide, please. And so in our language, as I recognize my mom being one of my first teachers, that and we understand the role that plays. She was one of many, many of my teachers, and I honor them as I continue with this presentation, because some of them have passed on, some that are still here continue to teach me every day. And that awakening occurs every time the sun rises. I know I'm going to be learning something new about our language and about how our language connects to the world. And notice I didn't say my language, I said our language, because we speak in that manner. It's not about me, it's about the we. Next slide. And how those cultures, those symbols of Anishinaabe people, the Thunderbird being one of those symbols, we see it has been commercialized and materialized by our society and our Western commercial systems, that the Thunderbird is not a car. It's a sky spirit, and we honor him. And it was a sculpture I built back in 2005 as a way of reclaiming that cultural symbol and putting it where it belongs, and that is in the sky. Next slide, please. And so in our language, in the Ojibway language, when we make reference to the four directions, when we honor those directions in our morning prayers, and we say to the east, we say to the south, we say to the west, we say to the north, what's really key is that the tail end of the word, anung or nung, means star. And if we look at in the language of Ojibway, wabanang, It's that light that we see and the star that it presents, that eastern direction, that morning star, that Jawanang, that southern star, Epingishmuk Gawinang, meaning that when the sun goes down, there are no stars. And it's hard to see them when the sun's setting. But the key in this presentation is that Kiwedanang, depending upon the dialect of Cree or Ojibway, we see that same word, Kiweden, as in the casino in Sioux, Michigan, that Kiwedanang. Giwed alone doesn't mean north, because the word Giwed on its own means to go home. Giwe, to go home. And when we add that Giwe Denang, that di is about that mutual benefit, that mutual connection, that we go home to the stars. When we've passed on to the spirit world, when we've completed our physical journey, we are told that the Anishinaabe people are star people. And our language that is over 10,000 plus years old as a language has in them those words for those directions. But that North Star, as we see Polaris, to us is not a star. It is a guide to where we would return from where we came. And that word dream, when we sleep, we dream. When we dream, our spirit travels to the spirit world and it will return. And that's that connection to the dream catcher. It's a guide, a tool, an instrument to assist us so that our body is here to receive back that spirit when it returns. But when we've completed that journey, our spirit returns home. Next slide. And so we see that connection to the land, we see the connection to the different art forms. And one of them is these pictoforms called the medicine wheel. The medicine wheel was a symbol that we see like Stonehenge in Europe, that these are tools that are over 5,000 years old. Archaeological evidence and carbon dating of these wheels that we see all over the Americas have been dated at over 5,000 years old. And it comes with a prophecy as well as a functional tool. You line yourself up depending upon where you are positioned on different areas or angles of the stones that are in there, that we would line up and we would see the changes in the seasons. We would see the summer solstices, the winter equinox. We would see the changes occurring. But those also were divided up into four, like we see the four colors that we see to the right, where we see the four of the medicine wheel, and that they acknowledge those changes in the four directions. But they also represent the four stages during the day: morning, afternoon, evening, and nighttime. But they also acknowledge the different aspects of our being, our mind, our body, our spirit, and our emotion. And they're all equal. And that no one part of the day, no one part of ourselves, no one part of the world around us is more important than other. It's that equalness and access to all, to the benefit of all. And that's where the medicine comes from the wheel, is when we come together equally. But the key point here is that symbol is also a prophecy, that all those four colors will one day come to exist here in North America. That all those colors of humankind, the yellow cultures, the African cultures, the European cultures, would come here to the land of the red cultures. Next slide. And we see that pattern and that connection to those symbols is identifying that North America is also spoken of in many indigenous tribes as Turtle Island. And it's the pattern and the connection that we see that's on there, in the same way that we see the moon in the sky, is that the cycle that the moon has is equal to the patterns associated to a turtle's shell and the patterns on it, where the outer edge of the shell has a total of 26 small shapes, plus the head and tail give it 28. And there are 13 smaller shapes that link to that. There are 13 28-day cycles, and the movement slowly, like the turtle, and the movement of the seasons are like that pattern of the 4 feet of the turtle. And so this is our living calendar, and that it's more accurate than our current calendar, because in French, September is the 9th month, but in French it means 7. Octa means 8, but October is the 10th month. We have here in the Americas a symbol that it predates all Western cultures, all European cultures, all indigenous cultures, in that it's a turtle that comes from the dinosaur age, that has a pattern on its back that can be seen, that can be linking to all women and their cycle and their pattern, and that no culture is disconnected from that reality. And that prophecy that all those colors of humankind would come to live here on Turtle Island, that these teachings are human teachings, that these teachings are meant for all cultures. And how do I know? Because every woman on this planet, whether they're indigenous or not, can link to the pattern that we see on a turtle. Next slide. And so that those patterns that we see in nature, the patterns that we see in the universe, were no coincidence the way in which our language evolved in looking and sharing and making connections to those patterns. Next slide. And so we see those forms within the artwork as ways of echoing and communicating that, from the serpent that we see down in Ohio, where we see the connections in all the different pictographs and forms all over the Americas, that these were not just put there for the heck of it, that there was symbolic and astrological and historical relevance in why those images were put on those forms, whether they be pictoforms and burial sites or carvings or paintings on rocks. They had purposes to communicate messages, because when we are spirit visiting during our time of sleep, when we visit with the ancestors, we may receive a message. It's not meant for us. That we may be the carrier of a message that we need to pass on the next day, the next year, and a decade later. We may not know when we need to pass on that message or who to pass it on to. So the goal here isn't about me and my spirit ancestors or my ancestors. It's more important that we are the messengers to receive those, to pass them on. And so when we create our art, those art forms are there to carry messages beyond us individually, because there is that linear time that we think of in Western culture, but to Indigenous peoples, it's a cyclical time. It's not a linear time. And that connects us to a much broader sense of history within the creation of the universe. Next slide. And those connections, as we see to the art forms that are there. Keep going. Next slide. And Jim, over 30 years ago, Jim Dumont, as he spoke, one of the important things in the messages he spoke of is that there is an Indigenous way of learning, and that if we only educate to the mind, we're going to miss all the other aspects, like the 4 colors of the medicine wheel. If we only educate and speak to the only one color on the wheel, all the other colors then are depleted, the same way that other aspects of our being become depleted. That we need to, when we speak to an individual, when we speak and teach and share with others, we need to be teaching to the whole person, to their mind, to their body, to their spirit and their emotions. And if we only focus on one, we are doing a disservice. Next slide. And as we understand in the language, we see the patterns that are there. They were not just simply, words, that they were connected to the land. They were connected to the animals and to the plants. These were different dialects that we'd see from one area to the other. And if you wanted to understand the culture, you need to understand where they existed within their respective geography. And if you ignored that geography, you would miss their relationship to universal teachings that are timeless. And when we see climate change being what it is that there are Indigenous peoples that have words in our language that we echo of an understanding to a change that had come before us and a change that will come after us. And that change in the language prepares us how to move forward and transition to adapt to the change that is coming. And if we dismiss that, as has been done in our history, we lose that connection. And it's those language words, those rooted elements that we see that link us to the stars. Next slide, please. Because those words link us to those directions, those words link us to those seasons, those words link us to those elements within those different respective directions. And we see those colors again, we see those words in the language. We have to understand that our connection to this physical world starts with a spiritual connection. And it's that seeing all of spirit, all creation being with spirit. And we honor the spirits in those respective directions. And it's in that understanding that we would not have climate change today if there was a continuance of that and a sharing of that and a celebrating of that and a participating in that understanding. If we understood from that Indigenous perspective how important it is that we live on this earth, but we must care for this earth, because we are only here for a short time, and that we will return to the spirit world. But it's if we think about it, if you go to a park or a playground and you leave it messier than it was when you arrived, then it's on you that you had made that world that you visited worse off than it was before you. So that's the learning that is coming from all of these elements. And we move on to the next slide. We understand the connection to those stories. So keep going to the next slide. And so we see again the words in the language. If we move on again, we saw those connections to the stars. Next slide. And how important it is that we will be returning home. And the Anishinaabe the Ojibway stars and the constellations within those stars were not just simply put up there for the heck of it. Each of them have their own story. As we see our own animals, we have a moose, we have a crane, we have a loon, we have a marten, and we have an ojig. I should say we have a bijou. A Misha Bijou is the character, and then we have these three human forms, and one of them is the old man winter, you would call him, but is baboon kinenene, is that the man of winter, the winter maker. And then we see this great hunter. But if you move from the woodlands east to the east coast, these animals would change. Some of them would change. If you move north, you would see the animals change depending upon the culture and their relationship to their physical environment. And their physical environment be where they would draw upon those connections. To the Cree out west, their dreamcatcher pattern looks more like a spider's web. And their characters change and differ. Whereas we see the connection between the bear in Western culture and the astronomy of the Big Dipper as the Great Bear. But for the woodlands, it's the marten, or a great weasel that we would understand. We call him the ojig. And I'll get to that. We move on to the next slide. So the next slide speaks to them individually, and I'll go through them quickly. Bijou is lynx in Ojibway. So we see in the name of this great panther, we see him on the rocks, that he wasn't just painted for the heck of it, that there's a story there, that Misha Bijou, he's a mythical being. He's a serpent-like form, dragon-like image that shares that, and we call him curly tail, or we identify him as this great panther. And that role that he plays within our mythology is that he lives in Lake Superior, and that he exists there for the purposes of reminding us of our connection. And we see the color of the ochre that he is, that was painted in the rocks, that red ochre. But where he exists is where some of the purest forms of copper, that red ore that can be found in ancient copper mines, was one of our trade items. And so anytime I visit the Great Lakes, anytime I visit Lake Superior in my home community, I bring copper, I bring penny, and I place it into the water, and I acknowledge him. Because if I'm going to go in that water, he is going to be there. And if we are disrespectful to him, he will be disrespectful to us. And so those are the stories that connect us to that physical journey, is that he's not just simply up in the sky, he's also here on this land. Next slide. And we'll go through a number of them relatively. So this one here, there's the constellation of the sweat lodge. So we say ma do do the swan. So it's how important it is that when we are in that lodge, the sweat lodge, it is like we are returning inside the womb of Mother Earth, that dome-shaped structure where you put the rocks that are heated up and bring them in there, and we sweat. And when we sweat, it's like that amniotic fluid when we are inside our mother, because the earth is our mother. Next slide. And we see the importance of the connection of that bathed, that person. Actually, we go back one slide, please. Go back one slide. So I have another presentation where I have more images of the sweat lodge. But that lodge is an echo of the mother's womb. And the entrance way that we see is that it faces the eastern direction. And we see him in there. But the key here is that when we would see that bather, that sweat lodge, that exhausted bather emerging from the sweat lodge, would be a time when we be beginning to do our fasting and our sweats to cleanse ourselves, to purify ourselves in late spring as we move into summer. So it cleanses us, it purifies us, and prepares us for the new life that is coming. And so we see it only then in that sky. Next slide. We see that time of winter where we see Baboon Kinenene, that winter maker, you would know as Orion, and his arms are outstretched, and we see him calling upon that change in season. And winter is that time we would begin to see him and understand the importance in our mythology is that these great beings, these great Manitous, carry these roles that remind us of the connection to the stars and the animals and the universe while we exist here on this earth. Next slide. And we see that those stars are not just simply patterns in there, that they are echoing. So we see him there. And when we see him doing that pointing and that movement, and we see him changing in the sky, we get to share those stories. And it would be this time of the year of winter that we would share these stories, because when you say the name of some of these beings, when you say the name of some of these Manitous, you invite them to come. Next slide. There's going to be several, so keep going. Keep going. And he continues to remind us of our connection. Next slide. Now we see Mung. Mung is the word for loon in Ojibway, and it's identified as the Little Dipper. And in the tail of that Little Dipper, we see that North Star, Polaris. But for us, the loon is one of our leaders in our leadership system of the clan system. The loon is one of them, the crane is the other. And the two represent the roles that they play as leadership, but the Mung, the loon, is the one who guides us and reminds us, because if we look at the anatomy of a loon, their legs far to their back, they are closest to the water where they rest and their nest. They are close to home. They govern close to home. They are the ones that govern and guide us. A loon mates for life, and if a loon's mate passes on, you will see it lone on a lone loon on the lake calling out for its mate, and its pattern on its back. Next slide. I'm sure there's an image of the loon on the next slide. That we see the pattern on its back, that is an homage to the role that it plays, that those are the stars you see that are in the sky reflected on the water on which it swims. Those patterns on its back are not just simply geometric, they are a respect that the Creator gave to that bird for the role that it plays in teaching us how to be honoring of home, honoring of family, and honoring of community. And so we honor that Hmong, we honor it, and we give it that role that it plays as part of not only the Small Dipper, but also that Polaris, that North Star, that Giwedanong, that going home star. Next slide. Next star. Next slide. And one more. And we see the connection. Next slide. Click again. That one there. Keep going. It's moving all over the place. There we go. So we see in the language, and these are just going to be some quick slides of some of the words in our language. The word for earth is ke or ake. And we see all these other words that have the word earth in it. But if we move down right to the middle, where it says mishke for medicine. The word medicine in Ojibway has the word earth in it twice, because when you are standing on the earth in a good way, in a balanced way, not one leg up and the other one trying to teeter itself, but 2 feet on the earth, earth, you are showing that you are medicine. When you are standing on this earth in a respectful way, you become medicine. And then we see all these other words that link to that relationship, to our connection to the earth, because of that role. Next slide. We see that other words and connections to the words of to drink and jibakwe, to feast, the word anishinabekwe. These are more dialogue words and questions in this slide that if we had more time, I'd speak more to them, because it echoes the depth within our language of the role that women play, and they are not just what we would assume in the old school of thinking of women do this and men do that. It's much deeper than that, because the role that women play is that they're the ones that take in that seed to bring about life, and that we honor that spirit. Next slide. And we see the words rooted within our language. The word for heart. The word for heart is in the word for drum. The word for heart is in the word for fire. The word for heart is in the word for clan. You would know as totem, but it's actually doda. It's not a West Coast cultural object. It's a word that we would use to define our clan system. And our clan system is like our extended family connection with the animals. And the wolf is my clan. When I see wolf clan members from other cultures, they become like brothers and sisters. Next slide. And so we see the connections to other words. And one of my elders, Helen Roy, she speaks in a language book that she had put together, and the J-I or J-double-I speak about this inner effort that is existing. And in our words, in Ojibwe, the J speaks to spirit, speaks to the things that relate to spirit. And that echoes all within all those words. And even the word to dream near the bottom of that list is Bwajige, Bawajige, that J is in there. It's that our spirit is traveling to the spirit world. Next slide. And we see those words of wa, like in the direction of wabanung. That wa refers to that light or the whiteness of it. And so we see all these connections, is that first light of day in the east when the sun rises is that waba Nung is the star, so that morning star. So the words themselves, even the word for rabbit is wabus, it echoes the role that it plays, and the words themselves show us those patterns. But one of them is the white-tailed deer, which is wawashkesh, because when a deer gets startled in the bush, we would see its white tail as it would bounce and leap through the forest. So we literally would see it and hear it. And so its name isn't us calling it, it's echoing what we see and hear. And that's how the language works. Next slide. And we see the connections to the ba. When someone is asleep, they would say ba. My mom would say majan, and gushman, chaban. She would say, go to bed, go to sleep. And that ba is a word that also refers to and is linked to when someone moves on to the spirit world. We'd say that at the end of their name, they've moved on. But we would also see it in words that make sound. But if we took a radio telescope or a microphone and we put it up in outer space and we turned it on and we listened to the sound, the same sound you would hear, that static that we'd pick up on the microphone, would be the same sound that a shaker or a rattle that we would have, that we'd give to a baby, because they are still closest to the spirit world. As a baby, they would recognize that sound that they would have heard when they came from the spirit world, from the stars to the earth. And so that shaker, that sound, we would see in these words echoing those elements. That sound is identified with that ba. The word cars, da ban. To laugh is ba pe. We see those elements in it. Even the way for rapids is ba wa ting. The ba is the sound. The wa is the white foam or the mist above the water. The words are very, very literal. Next slide. And as we continue, that bih in our language, it makes reference to water, in what water does. We say nebe, nebish for water, but it's so much more than that, because the word for life in Ojibway, if you go down near the bottom where it says bimad zid or bimad dizawin, that's making reference to life. But just below that where it says baby, binoji, it literally means water or the flow of water of a spirit, that j or that g. So binojis is that the word for baby literally is telling us that path, that flow of that spirit. So our languages is very literal, but it's not limited to our physical experience. It's connecting us to our spirit, to the spirit world, to the stars. Next slide. And we understand that those stars that are up there are not just for the heck of it. And that's where I'll wrap it up here, because there are other animals I'd like to talk about. One of them being the moose, and the echo of the time that we would see. If you look along the right side of that, where it would say a dogwin, it's the autumn or fall, and that is the only time we would see it, and that would be the only time we would hunt that moose. But when we go to the one that I want to finish off with, to echo the importance that these stories are not just by coincidence. Ojig. If we go to the Ojig, and if we can fast forward, if you go through and click through the slides till we get to the Ojig. So click on the slides until we get to the Ojig and see if it'll show up. I guess not. Okay, then go back. All right, so the Ojig is near the middle. It's the Big Dipper. The Ojig is a large marten, a large weasel-like form. And it was a story that occurs that goes way back when we speak of a time that was called the Forever Winter. That forever winter, that where all the animals were becoming more and more hungry, and it was getting colder and colder, and it was becoming hard for them to survive. And so all the animals were saddened by it, and they began to recognize the birds had not returned. And they were wondering why, and they discovered that there was this great hunter, this great ogre that you see in the upper part of this circle, this great hunter, and he had captured all the birds, and all the birds were being held captive in this bag inside his lodge. And it's only when the birds return that they bring that change in the seasons. They bring about that new life. And since those birds had not returned, winter was forever. Spring was not to come. And all these animals were becoming worried and concerned. And they called this great gathering, this council fire of all these animals, and asked who could be the one to be brave enough to assist us, to go and retrieve those birds and set them free. And after a period of time, they agreed upon the encouraged Ojig. Ojig the marten, to ask him, because of how sly and strong and warrior-like that he was, that he would be the ideal person to help them to go in there. And they encouraged him, and he finally agreed, and he proceeded to sneak into the hunter's den. And when he snuck in there, he saw these birds inside the sack, and he grabbed them quickly, and he fled from the lodge of the hunter. And as he fled, he was chased and pursued by this hunter. And as he was being pursued, he climbed up a tall tree, up on a high mountain, and leaped into the sky. And he pounded on the sky, pounded so hard to break open that frost, to release those birds. And while he was up high in the sky, that great hunter cast an arrow at him and got him in his tail. He sacrificed himself. He survived, but he sacrificed his life for others, for spring, for change to occur. And those birds were released, and spring returned, and life was replenished. And so all the animals pled to the Creator and asked to honor him for the role that he played. And they place upon that constellation that you know of as the Big Dipper, we identify as Ojig. And we honor him when we see that arrow in his tail, and the wound that he had endured for the sacrifice of his flesh for others. And that premise is part of it. But my question to you as we close for this presentation now tonight is, what was that forever winter? What was that presentation that I just shared in that story of our people in the land of my ancestors that go back over 7,000 years? The story of the great winter you know of as the Ice Age. That our stories predate much of what science slowly had discovered within the last couple of hundred years, what indigenous stories knew for millennia. Those stories and those animals and those beings in the sky are not just images. They are our relations. Miigwech. Back to you.
Miigwech, well, thank you. That was definitely a lot more than just dream catchers. That was a whole language lesson, and thank you very much. Much appreciated. Going to our comments, there is one comment. I don't know how to pronounce this name properly, but I'm gonna go with Kaj. And I know this was something you know, tongue in cheek, and you always bring humor in. I could tell you were trying to like get a lot in tonight, going rapid fire. But I know you always try to bring humor into your presentations. That's part of the culture as well. And so you talked about the months, you know, kind of tongue in cheek. But one of our viewers has brought up something kind of cool that I didn't know, which is that the months names in English and French come from the ancient Romans, who their calendar started with March, much like our fiscal year. And so at that time, before March was called Mars for the god of war, it was the first month. And so that's why September ended up being the 7th month. So there's always these interesting layers of history and tradition in there. And then also bringing up the days of the week being named for gods as well. So we have like Saturn Day, or there's also Thor's Day and Woden's Day, I think, for Thursday.
And Mercury from Makrati. But the off by 2 as well is linked to Julius Caesar and Caesar Augustus for the summer months that were added as well in those Roman calendars. And so those connections are there as well. We recognize that there's so much that we are not taught in our histories. And that was part of the point that I'm getting at, is that when we don't know the origins of even the words we use, then we lose our connection to that history. And so how important it is that we learn our histories, but because we are here in North America, not in Europe, not in Asia or Africa, it's the stories of the language from here to help us understand the stars that we see above us here.
Yes. Yeah.
And
absolutely.
That's what's important. So if I went to Europe, I would know that. But coming here, who knows about the words for the stars here? The stories of the stars here. And that's what would help us deal with how we live here.
And the moons as well, right?
Yes,
When you talked about the teaching of the turtle and the moon cycle, and how, you know, our months as we recognize them are off. So, you know, when I'm tracking my cycle, I can't just be like, oh yeah, it's this day of the month, you know, because it's all off kilter. The months are a little bit too long, so that there's only 12 of them instead of 13, and it makes it hard to track. And also like the names of the moons, right? So those are very place-based, right? So when you have, you know, the sugaring moon that telling you when to collect the sap, that depends on where you are. And now as things change, we're going to see it
change again. Exactly. Yeah. So like up in Northern Ontario, we would have our sugaring moon coming later, that those south of us that are also Ojibway or Anishinaabe speakers, that their sugaring moon would come sooner. So their March is before our March. And that's kind of because the geography tells us. And that's why I made mention to that is that we don't have killer whales in the Great Lakes. So we don't use their stories and their creatures, their animals, their symbolism. We have our own, but it's relative to the physical geography we're in. And we honor that. So,
well, I'm really looking forward to continuing this conversation this evening under the Perseids meteor shower. It's not going to be super clear tonight, but we want to gather anyway and to leave that big dream catcher and to get more into the dream catcher teachings and hopefully catch a few shooting stars as well. To all of you who joined us, thank you so much for being here and sticking to the end. On Mentimeter, there are a few questions left. If you want to go ahead and answer them, we won't.
So while you get ready for the questions, just to confirm, to let everyone know, where are we going to gather? I would like to gather up on the grass.
Okay, yes. So we're going to be at Science North. And the elements entrance, there's a big grassy field near there, so we can gather up there on the grass, and it'll be nice and dark for us. We will have the telescope out just in case there's a few breaks in the clouds, so you'll be able to sign up for telescope viewing time as well. We'll just make sure we take your spot in the circle with the weaving. And yeah, definitely, I see some of you on the Mentimeter, so that's great. And if you liked our content, please do give us a like, subscribe. You can even offer up a donation through our Eventbrite link. And we will be back next month, Saturday, September 11th. We will be joined by an astrophysicist and fellow science communicator, Jesse Rogerson. So that's going to be a lot of fun. And for now, if we don't see you tonight, we'll say our farewells and thank you. Now see, miigwech, and keep looking up.
Awesome. Miigwech.